good idea.
I can tell you, but maybe you can participate.
Yeah, of course.
We're ready. Okay. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Today welcome back. So today it's really an honor to have Professor Yakira with us. Professor Yakira was born and raised in Israel. He has a doctorate from the Sorbonne in Paris. He was a professor of philosophy at Hebrew University and wrote extensively on really important books and texts on the study of various issues, including anti-Semitism. And today he's going to speak. The title of his talk is Judeophobia and Anti-Israelism. So the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I hope you received the handout that I asked to distribute, and you can just have a look. This is a very interesting text, I think, in many ways. It's a kind of introduction, a page of introduction on the website of what is called by the writers of this paper the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress. It convened in Vienna on June 13 and 15, so about a month and a half ago. I think this is a very interesting text, and I think that the allusion of First Congress is obvious. I don't think I will have to comment on it. It's, of course, they refer to the First Zionist Congress. They didn't have to mention Jewish in the Zionist Congress, but here they emphasize it's a Jewish Congress, and it's an anti-Zionist Congress, and the text is a pearl of I don't know how to call it exactly. I would have liked to deconstruct it more, but it doesn't. We don't have the time, and it's not worth it. Anyway, but you can, if you just look at the first line, it says, the world watches in horror the unfolding genocide, of course, against Palestinians, people committed by Zionism. It's not the state of Israel. It's committed by Zionism, etc., etc. It's supported by the world. You know, it's all the right things out there. So this text actually, besides the interest I find in it, it gives me an opportunity to give you the first of three warnings that I want to give you. And the first is that my talk is not fully baked. I had a teacher who became later my colleague, or I became his colleague, who liked very much to travel all around and to all kinds of colloquia and conferences. Every time he opened his lecture by saying, this is a work in progress. So mine is not work in progress, but reality is in progress. And this is an example of it, because as I was working on my paper, on my talk here, things were popping up and require some kind of reaction, some kind of somehow to incorporate it into what I want to say. And this is one example of them. There were others. Actually, a couple of weeks before we went here, I submitted a manuscript of a book to my publisher, and it was about a year later than what I expected. And everything was, it's a collection of essays dealing with the kind of things we deal here. And it was delayed for about a year because I tried to write something preface or postface, somehow putting the event or the essays included in the book in the context of what's going on in Israel. First, the so-called revolution, the constitutional revolution, and the huge, manifestation. I'm sure you are aware of it. Then the war, and then the war with Iran, and everything. So every time I thought I had something interesting to say that will be not outdated in a day or two, the next day, the ink on the computer screen hardly dried out, and it already was obsolete. So it's very hard to get the things that we are living now into some kind of a coherent framework that does more than just tell the facts. Which brings us to the second warning. I'm not an historian. I'm not a historian of anti-Semitism. As Charles Chad said, I spent most of all of my career, actually, and still do, in teaching and writing about philosophy. And I'm talking here as a philosopher, and or not as a philosopher, but let's say as a teacher of philosophy, someone whose main occupation was philosophy. And as you know, maybe you know, philosophers are not very good with facts. So I do not want to tell the facts again. I want to go beyond the facts and to give some kind of reflexive thinking about the question that I put here, namely, what is the relation, what is the rapport between what we call anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism on the other hand. And I'll give to it first of all a kind of philosophical question, a philosophical answer to it, typically, and the answer is yes and no, of course. It is and it isn't, and I'll try to explain why a little bit better in what comes. The third warning is that I speak here as an Israeli. And since I've been involved for some time now in the conversation about this kinds of question, I realized that there are great differences and discrepancies between the way we Israelis experience what's happening and the way people outside Israel, even friends and supporters and sympathizers, experience, understand, and think about it. I'll give you an example or two. For us, for people like me who were born in Israel and raised in Israel, anti-Semitism, at least until very lately, has been a kind of hearsay, of a rumor, of an abstraction, to use a more academic word. We heard about it. Some of us are interested in it. Some of us are not even that. But we don't experience it. On the other hand, I have a good friend who visited Israel, and the war broke out with Iran, and he was caught there, trapped, so to speak, in Jerusalem. And he had to rush every day, more than once, to the shelter, to a public shelter. And it was amazing and even to some extent, I would say, amusing to see his reaction. Suddenly he, I think, got to understand something that people, although hear about it, understand it, but they don't experience it, and they don't know what it means to run to a shelter when the sirens go out. So there are differences here. And I don't think we have to, I think we have to acknowledge them, not to overlook. These are the warnings, sort of. And my thesis, my main thesis, is that, as I said, yes and no. Anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism are two different things. Each has its own specificity, and we have perhaps to distinguish them. Both of them, to my mind, are forms of anti-Semitism, or connected to it in all kinds of ways. But the ways they are connected is not simple, and it's not straightforward. To some extent, as the late, very regretted friend, historian Robert Wistrich, called it, it is the oldest hate. And it is indeed very old. I'm not sure, I'll say a few words about it maybe in the, later on. I'm not sure at all that this is, the hate is the right word to describe it. As a historian usually consider anti-Semitism as something that unfolds in history, as what we call diachronic continuity, which means, in the philosophical jargon, that there is a continuity in time. It's the same thing for unfolding over time. This is, of course, the case to some extent, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't even tell the main part of the story. I think that the continuity or the affinity or the similarity between anti-Semitism in, I use the word anti-Semitism, by the way, I had a remark, although I don't think it's a good word. Anti-Semitism is, I'm sure you know, it's a term was coined in the second half of 19th century, and it was referred to a specific, located in time, ideological movement, the racist, modern anti-Semitism. And maybe if I have time, I'm not sure, I'll say a few words about this also later. But for kind of reasons that will become hopefully later clearer, I shall use this word. So, sorry. So, beside this diachronic or historical continuity in time, there are other forms of continuity or similarity or affinity, which are more structural than temporal. And I think this explains or defines better the way in which anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism are, to my mind, forms of anti-Semitism. For instance, there is the persistence of certain tropes, like, I think it was mentioned yesterday, I don't remember by whom anymore, the ritual killing of children. I can tell you an anecdote from my own experience. I was invited many years ago to participate in a panel discussion on the question of what is Zionism in the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, which is the most prestigious institution of higher education in France. And we were three. There were not very many people. People knew that something was going to happen. And as we tried to begin the discussion, a bunch of kids got up and started shouting things like Israel assassin and assassin des enfants, killers of children. And this is a theme that repeats itself over and over and over again, especially today. And whether it is or it isn't a reawakening or of this old trope of ritual killing of children is, of course, very difficult or even impossible to know, but it doesn't seem to be altogether, gratuitous. We saw yesterday a long list of beautiful drawings of Jews, of caricatures. And again, the trope or the stereotype of the crooked nose and so many other things reappear in contemporary depiction of Israel, of the Jews. So, of course, something remains from the older ways in which anti-Semitism was expressed. We call it, this the kind of development, we call it dialectic or dialectical development, which means roughly and very schematically that when things evolve or develop in history, in historical time, new stages retain and at the same time reject elements of the former stages. And I think we see it here as well. So this is one element of the structural or the structure of anti-Semitism. It's a dialectical transformation and development in time. And but then also what remains the same all the time is the target. It's always the Jews who are targeted, whoever they are. And even if they are not around, and even if they have lost all specific characteristics, still the target are the Jews, the real or usually the imaginary, actually. So here is one first element in which, on the basis of which I can affirm that anti-Israelism is a form of anti-Semitism. And what I mean is that as anti-Semitism has developed and evolved and changed over time, the Jew it targeted was usually the main foreign Jewry or Jewishness or Jewish life war at the time. Religious first, theological, etc., etc. And nowadays, it's Israel. I think that Israel nowadays is the main expression of Jewishness. Nowadays in Israel live already more than half of the Jews of the world live in Israel, and in a very short time, if nothing dramatic happens, but dramatic things happen in Israel all the time, as you know. But if, according to the demographs, the majority of Jews will be living in Israel shortly. So this will be the main center of Jewish life. It's also the main center, I think, of Jewish culture. If you look at the place of Hebrew in the Jewish world, of Hebrew songs, and of Hebrew literature, you know, at the first days of Zionism, there was a big argument between cultural Zionists and political Zionists. In fact, they are both won. Israel is a political entity, a state, a Jewish state, and it is the cultural center of Jewish life worldwide. I'm not trying to diminish the role, the weight, the value of what of cultural and otherwise creation of Jews outside of Israel. But I think Israel is a center of Jewish life nowadays, and this is one of the reasons, I think, again, that why modern day anti-Semites direct so much energy in order to fight against Israel as such. Now, I think that whoever watches what's going on in the streets, read the social networks, etc., cannot miss the fact that there is here a conflation of Israeli Zionism and anti-Semitism. Like in the text we've just read, they speak about Zionists. They don't speak about Jews, they don't speak about Israelis, but they speak about Zionists. What is Zionism here? It's usually a different name to name Jews. So, of course, I think it's difficult to ignore it or to deny it. What we see in front of us is one coherent whole in which come together anti-Israelism, anti-Zionism, and anti-Jewishness. But this is only half the story. It's not the important one and not the interesting one to my mind. If we look at the history, recent history of this anti-Israelism, there are a few milestones, important milestones. It so happened that I was in Paris. I was quite often there, used to be, now less. It so happened that I was there during a few of these important events. The first one was the first Lebanon war. And what I faced there, it was the first time in my life that I saw such a thing, and I realized how deep it can go, was an orgy of hatred towards Israel. And of course, Jews were hit also. There was a famous attack on the, what's the name of the restaurant? Goldenberg, and then the synagogue in anyway. What? But the issue was Israel. On the face of it, it was Israel and what it was doing to the Lebanese. And then was Savoy Shatila. Well, you know, it was a complicated story. This was the, I would say, the aperitif for what we see now. The second event, the second milestone, is the year 2000, which is a real turning point. And I mean a few things. One of them, in which it became clear to everybody, is of course the Durban Conference. And in the Durban Conference, many things happened. And I think David Hirsch, in one of the articles, said that one of the things that happened there was that this anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist culture has become hegemonic. And I think it's true. But there were other things that happened. And there were other things that happened that concerned me, not just as a Jew or someone who is interested in this question, but as an Israeli. One of the things that happened there was the appearance of what we call red-green alliance. Or we talked about this. The holding hands of extreme left and Islamist anti-Semitism. But there was another thing that happened there, and this is not. It happened more in Camp David and in Israel than in Durban as well. But more important is what happened in Camp David, and in Israel and all over. What happened in 2000 in Camp David? There was a negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. It was the first time since the Six-Day War that Israel came forward with a recognition or acceptance of the idea of creating a Palestinian state. And the Palestinians refused, rejected. Not only they rejected, but they opened a war on the Israeli society, which is what we call the second intifada, or the suicide bombs intifada. So many of people in Israel, like myself, I consider myself what is called in Israel Zionist left, which support basically the idea of two states. Now it's not anymore a question of creating it, but I prefer to speak about in a little bit different terms. I prefer to speak about this as keeping the principle of partition alive. The one principle, you know that before the creation of the State of Israel, there were a few committees, UN and international, that came out with different plans of partition of the land between Jews and Arabs. The name Palestinians was not used then yet. Usually, Israel, the Israeli government leadership, accepted those plans, despite that it went very much against the Zionist plans. But it accepted the idea that the land, the country, has to be divided between the two people living in it. The Palestinians, the Arabs, the Mufti is a famous, key figure here, rejected all these plans, and they went to war. And this is, by the way, I'll add here a small, short remark. It's a pattern that repeats itself every once in a while. They fool themselves, the Palestinians, that they can destroy the Israeli yeshuvs, the Israeli, the Israeli state, or whatever you call it, that was, and every time they suffer defeats, humiliating, and as we see now in Gaza, terrible. But this is also began, the Gaza war, with the idea of Hamas that they can defeat Israel. Well, all kinds of illusions and hopes, and the hopes Hezbollah will come and the Iranians will come. Nobody came, and look what happened to Lebanon. I don't believe I have to repeat on it, but this is a pattern that has repeated itself time after time in history. So, but as I said, in 2000, after the failure of the Camp David, and the negotiations were going on yet in Taba and in other places, and the Palestinians went on with their suicide bombing, which cost the life of, I think, more than 1,000 Israelis died in these vicious attacks. We lived by then in Jerusalem, at the center of Jerusalem, and I remember many times we sitting in the house and heard the bombs all around us. And it was frightening, and it was dangerous. Eventually, they paid the price, as always, mainly the Palestinians. But as I said before, we understood, I consider myself the Zionist left, that the issue has not been 67 as we thought it was, namely the so-called occupation and the settlements and so on and so forth. But the issue was 48. Namely, the issue was the very principle, very idea of establishing a Jewish state on the land of Israel. This, at least the main leading parts of the Palestinians and the Arab world in general, less after 73 and the peace with Egypt, well, I don't have to repeat all this history, but still for the Palestinians in particular, the acceptance of the idea of a Jewish national state inside what they consider their own property was unacceptable. I had the chance, and what happened is another round of very vicious and terrible anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic discourse in Europe. And as I said, I was in Paris also at the time, and I had the chance to sit with two colleagues for long, long hours, many days, with Shlomo Ben Ami. I think this is significant. Shlomo Ben Ami was one of the leaders of the Israeli left. And at Camp David with Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister, he was one of the main negotiators on the Israeli side. And we sat with him. And he told us of all the effort he and the other Israeli team tried to, all the ways they were trying to walk towards the Palestinians, all the compromises, all the things that they accepted. Many think, for instance, that Barak, the prime minister, accepted were not on his original plan when he went to Camp David. But and to no avail. The Palestinians went on this intifada, which is one thing. But what happened beyond this, and this is what concerns me more, is the anti-Israeli atmosphere all over the world. The anti-Israeli radical refusal and anti-Zionist, meaning the refusal to accept the idea or the principle of a Jewish state. And we see now another round of it. The same thing all over again. Every time it goes in a kind of a crescendo. Every time worse, every time more radical, and every time the Palestinians suffer more. But as I said, what concerns me is what happened around us in the world. One of the things that happened, to come back to Durban, is that the anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism culture that appeared there is a culture, is an intellectual culture. It was a matter of intellectuals. And this is something also that parallels, or structurally parallels, I would say, the history of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews, began, we talked about it the other day, as a quarrel over legitimacy. I'm not talking, I won't talk about the Muslim side of the story. I don't feel myself capable or to talk about it. I'll talk about the European Christian side. And the Christians competed with Judaism as a father religion on legitimacy. And on the way of legitimacy, they tried to delegitimize the father religion. Perhaps the most important figure in this ancient history is St. Paul, Shaul HaTarsi in his Jewish Hebrew name, who invented, as some people think, universalism, but in the name of this universalism denied the right of the Jews to their own particularism. And this goes on in anti-Semitism all along. But there was something else in this beginning of anti-Semitism. And this is the role of the clerks, of the intellectuals, the people among whom this religious, theological anti-Jewishness was born were all theologians, some of them of the highest level, very good philosophers and theologians, and they invented anti-Semitism. And one of the things that remain is that anti-Semitism, and now the avatars of anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism, is a matter of intellectuals. What happens on the streets, on the campuses, in the social networks is important, but it's not, I would say, almost say, intellectually it's not interesting. But what happens among intellectuals is very interesting, because some leading intellectuals today play a role similar to the one played by the fathers of the church. I could give you a few examples. I don't think we have to finish in a few minutes, no?
15, up to you. 10,
and go on 15 minutes.
10
Okay.
Take your time.
For instance, St. Augustine was mentioned here yesterday, I think. One of the greatest church fathers, a great philosopher if there has ever been one. He was, I would say, somewhat nuanced in his anti-Judaism. But this, he didn't want them to be killed, but for theological reasons mainly. They have to remain what they are, to suffer, to be despised, to be persecuted, as a testimony to the victory of the Christian religion and faith over the Jewish one. And this Augustinian tradition continues for many centuries. There is one philosopher that I particularly like, and Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher, who was also very religious. He was a mathematical genius and a religious genius. And he has a very long and elaborate discussion of the Jews, of the Jewish people. He didn't know Jews, apparently. I don't think he knew Jews. In Paris at the time, by the mid-17th century, I don't think there were any Jews. Maybe there were a few. It's hard to know, but they were not part of his everyday life, or at all in his life. But he speaks of Jews endlessly, and in the same spirit of St. Augustine. Unlike St. Augustine, he shows a lot of compassion to the Jews. He admires them. He says, how come? We have to admire, to understand that this tribe, small tribe in some remote corner of the world, invented law, invented monotheism. How come they invented? But then they refused again to recognize Jesus as a true Messiah, and so they suffer until today. And they have to remain and suffer. However, although we pity them, we feel a lot of compassion to them, but this is their fate. So there are many others like him, religious, non-religious, theological, otherwise, and all of them somehow contribute, without wanting it, without willing it, without planning it, of course, to a culture that ends up in Auschwitz. And this must be seen. And one thing that, as I began to say, is that the modern day clerks, the modern day, the intellectual, is doing the same thing. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes explicitly, sometimes differently. I'll give you an example. There is a very an important historian by the Italian who lives now in the United States by the name of Enzo Traverso. He is a very interesting fellow. I would say the last thing I think we can say about him is that he hates Jews. He doesn't. But he published a few things that goes eventually to his last publication, a book which under the title Gaza Myths or Faces History. And he bluntly accuses Israel of genocide. And one of the most interesting things that he does there is that he denies the atrocities of October 7th, denies the rapes, denies the murder, denies what happened. Israel exaggerates, he says. It didn't happen as it did. And he's the modern clerk in the best sense of the word. So this is an example, and he is not the only one. And I'm sure that he doesn't hate Jews. On the contrary, he has behind him a number of publications that celebrate Jews and Jewishness and Jewish intellectuals during the 19th century, etc. But he despises Israel. And I think Jewish people has lost his soul by establishing a state and becoming a state, a people of a state. So, two last things that I want to elaborate a little bit about. One is the participation of Jews in this, and Israelis. Very often when I participate in these kinds of discussions, there is a big elephant in the room. And the big elephant in the room is the role of Israelis in the elaboration and their contribution, essential one, to the anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic discussion. I wrote a book about it. Not that I wanted to, but it so happened. And this is an important issue. Just before coming here, for instance, I read an article in the New York Times by Masha Gessen. Amazing, shameful article, in which she defends, what's his name, explains that he really is not an anti-Semite, that he suffers to tears, almost crying, when he was confronted with the question, if he was anti-Semite or not, and all kinds of development, and says the bottom line is that we have to think again about anti-Semitism, because Israel, and there is a point here, she's got a point here, I cannot deny it, especially the current government rushes to accuse every critic of Israel in anti-Semitism inside Israel and outside Israel. People like me, for the people around Bibi Netanyahu, are anti-Semite or traitors or whatever. And anyway, so this is one thing. And then another thing that happened immediately after, Gessen in this article, she wants to be referred to as they. So in their article, they wrote a whole paragraph on a guy by the name of Ishai Davidi. I don't know if it means anything to you. It's an Israeli who taught at Columbia University and just left because he was what? Shai Davidai, לא Davidai, Davidai. It's a Hebrew name, and he had to leave because you know the story. I see he failed in his attempt, doomed to be failed from the beginning, I guess, to oppose the anti-Israel, all the Palestinians and anti-Israel. So they write a paragraph on him. Oh, I can say him in this case. And it's a shameful, really shameful. She doesn't go all the way to excuse him for whatever, I don't know what, but she say his reaction is it comes from fear, and to the accusation of anti-Semitism of the university administration or the people occupying buildings at the university or the people on the streets or it's because of fear. So we have to rethink anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Semitism, it's something else. It doesn't say exactly what. Another figure which I'm sure you all or most of you know is, of course, Judith Butler. And Judith Butler is interesting in this case, in this context, because at a certain point, she was accused by Lawrence Summers, you know, by then the president of Harvard, that she was anti-Semite. His sentence was very interesting. He said, "You are anti-Semite by fact, if not by intent," which is an interesting, curious way to put it. And this gave Butler the opportunity to write a very long and seminal article, actually. No, the title is something like, "No, it's not anti-Semitism," in which she makes the same accusation that I mentioned it before. The accusation or the allegation that people like her are anti-Semite is a way to silence them and to silence criticism of Israel. And the same thing happened with the famous working definition of the, whatever. And you know perhaps that there were maybe 900 signatories on a letter saying that this definition is meant or dangerous to the freedom of speech and freedom of criticism. And in Jerusalem, there was something called the Jerusalem Initiative or Jerusalem, yeah, and an attempt, pathetic to my mind, to improve on the definition, on the working definition. The main point was, we want to be free to criticize Israel, but I don't think there are many countries in the world that are criticized like Israel is criticized, inside the country and outside it. No one, here and there were, you know, a few incidents, maybe in Germany, to some extent maybe in the United States, that people really suffered because of anti-Israeli discourses, but generally, there has never been so much criticism of Israel as there is now, inside and outside. Just go to Kaplan, you know, Kaplan Street. Kaplan Street is where hundreds of thousands of people came out manifesting against the government during months and during the so-called constitutional revolution, which was an attempt to destroy the institution of Israeli democracy, and well, I was part of it to some extent. I can't walk really, so I didn't participate in the manifestation, but when I could, I did. We stopped much of the revolution. And then came the war, of course, and, well, complicated issue. So the Jews and Israelis contribute to this scandal of anti-Israelism. Now, why is it a scandal? And this is my last point, maybe the main one. Judith Butler, to come back to her, she is an example. She is a paradigm for me. She's not interesting for me, at least, as such, but she represents something. Was offended deeply when she was accused of anti-Semitism. And I personally, I believe her. I think that Judith Butler is not an anti-Semite. I don't think Judith Butler is an anti-Semite. She has many other things, but she doesn't hate Jews as such. She doesn't even hate Israel, I think, as such. But she, the point that she made on many occasions, and this is what my point, is that Israel has to give up, this is more, I think I quote more or less accurately, has to give up the foundation of its legitimacy. Strange thing to say. What is the foundation of its legitimacy? It is not, we don't have to go too far, simply the foundation on which Israel was established as a Jewish state. In other words, Israel has to give up its essence, its nature as a Jewish state. It has to be something else. In different writings that I read, wasn't much fun, and not a great intellectual pleasure, I must say, but she proposes to build Israel on different foundation, ideological foundation. Human rights, equality, fraternity, and she proposes a cohabitation between Israelis and Palestinians. It's not anti-Semitic, not even perhaps, not by intent and not in fact. But it's something very, very, I would say, grave. What does it mean? It means that the great majority of the Jews in Israel and the great majority of the population in general will have to give up its will to live in a Jewish state. I would say that 95% or more of the Jews in Israel would not, never consent to it. And if this cannot happen, unless, if not in major bloodshed, to devoid Israel of its Jewish nature as a Jewish state. And not only Jews, I think the majority of Arabs in Israel, living in Israel as citizens in Israel, would also like to keep Israel as a Jewish state. So here we come to the point. My last point. Anti-Semitism has been from the very beginning a project of delegitimation. We saw it. I said a few words about it. It remained the same all the way. Now, what is delegitimation? This is a word we use often. I think we rarely try to understand the full meaning of the word. And what the meaning of the word, the full meaning of the word is that delegitimation is potentially and sometimes explicitly license to kill. Norman Cohen wrote a book, Warrant of Genocide, and a Jewish French historian, Gilles Isaac, wrote another book on the same and goes to a very long history in which this warrant to kill or license to kill or the potential of killing has been growing inside Christianity and Europe and arrived today to the discourse around and about Israel. And I think this is what it is about, a license to kill. This is a happy note, maybe I shall...
Thank you. So I'll start off with a question. I don't know if there's any questions. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. And I'm going to start where you ended. And I'm going to push back. You actually said that in the different phases of anti-Semitism, there were movements or a set of ideas that were about delegitimizing Israel. There's a religious phase of anti-Semitism, a racist nationalist phase of anti-Semitism, and now the attack on who we are as a people and our connection to Israel.
Okay.
And there's the delegitimization. And this leads to a license to kill. And then you speak about how Judith Butler is actually trying to remove the very foundation of the foundational elements of Zionism and Jewish self-determination in any space in our land. And she's trying to take away that legitimacy, and maybe it's not a racist form of delegitimization. Maybe we can convert. We can convert to the human rights religion and be acceptable. But where I think I lose you, and why I would argue very clearly, to me, Judith Butler is a rabid, clear anti-Semite, is that she legitimizes the Red-Green Alliance to the core. She plays a crucial role in this legitimization, to the point where a queer Jewish feminist with a wonderful career, an emancipated woman in the West, actually says that Hamas and Hezbollah must be understood as the progressive global left. She said this around 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And after October the 7th, she said it again. And she is in my mind, a token Jew that is paraded in certain spaces that you and I can't go to, and legitimizes the demonization and promotes a license to kill, which came from the classroom of Western universities to the encampment, to our streets, and now into halls of power. So why are you not, we say tachlis, why do you think she's not an anti-Semite?
Because I don't think she hates us, or she hates Jews. One thing. Look, I'll answer by going to giving another example.
She's a feminist woman, forget her Jewish identity, supporting Hamas, after the rapes, after the murders.
Yeah, all this is true, and it's characteristic. All the main feminist organization in the West refuse to acknowledge the sexual crimes that were committed there. There's no, as I said, don't confuse me with the facts. The facts are clear. The question is how do we interpret them? And I think that interpreting the facts need to draw significant distinctions. I'll give you another example. Maybe it will be easier to go through it. One of the structural, so to speak, similarities that I find between classical, let's say, anti-Semitism and the new one, anti-Zionism, is the what is called denialism. One of the interesting and horrible strategies of left wing, by the way, mainly in France. It was an interesting phenomenon in France that it came from ex-Trotskyite. And I'm talking about the denial of the Holocaust, of course. And I met some of these guys. They were not anti-Semite. They were leftist. There were even a few Jews among them. But they denied that there was annihilation of Jews by gas. And in general, the Holocaust is a fraud. Now, at a certain point, Ahmadinejad, then the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, organized in Tehran a congress dedicated to establishing the truth about the Holocaust. And there were deniers of all colors, of all manipulation, and among them, a small group of Neturei Karta, ultra-Orthodox Jews. The Tui Karata is basically a Hungarian movement. A Hungarian, they come from Hungary. The neighborhood in Jerusalem where they live is called Batei Ungarin, the houses of the Hungarians. And you know what happened to the Hungarian Jewry, I think. It was almost completely annihilated. And no doubt about it that among those people, there were relatives that died in Auschwitz. And yet they came to Tehran to speak about the lie of the Holocaust, of the destruction of the Jews in gas chambers. Were they anti-Semite or weren't they not? I think they are not anti-Semite, it's something else. And I think our task as intellectuals and as academics is to try to see the differences and to understand these kinds of phenomenon in their specificity. And I think that what's her name? Judith Butler, we have to understand her in the specificity of what she is. Everything you said, it's true. We all can, accuse her of whatever we want, and we would be right. But I think it's different. And there is a difference, and a deep difference, and significant difference between her as a Jew and other cases of this. And she is not the only one. BDS was initiated by Jews. A couple of British university people, Jacqueline Rose and her husband, I forget his name, I think they were the first to speak of boycotting Israel. Are they anti-Semite? They're stupid, but I'm not sure they're anti-Semite. And I can count endless.
So I think David wants to ask a question, and then Rabbi Kish, but I just want to say one point. I think in Jewish ethics, we judge the action and the inaction, not the heart. But okay. Professor Hirsch.
Well, just a question about what it means to us if somebody is anti-Semite or not. So most people, when they talk about contemporary theories of racism or of anti-Semitism or of other structures of unjust discriminatory power, do not define them in terms of conscious intentions. So, we all know that there are institutional and structural racisms. There are institutions that exclude black people. There are people who act in misogynistic ways but do not hate women and have no self-consciousness of hating women, but they embrace all kinds of sexist practices and ways of thinking. What could it possibly mean to ask whether somebody is an anti-Semite, other than that they support anti-Semitic ways of thinking and anti-Semitic exclusions? In other words, it is not at all a usual definition of racism or anti-Semitism that it is based on hatred. It doesn't need to be based on hatred. And secondly, simply the experience of being a student or a scholar in a department where everybody else thinks that you are a Nazi is an experience of exclusion of the most personal and serious kind. And you might say that the people doing that are not anti-Semites because they do not have any self-conscious motivation of hatred. But the experience of being subjected to that kind of exclusion and that kind of erasure, that kind of libelous way of dismissing your work, it cannot be understood as anything other than an experience of anti-Semitism.
Okay. this comes back to what I said at the beginning, is that we experience this as Israelis in a very different way than you are. There are no such things, such experiences in departments of university in Israel as the ones that you...
I don't agree with that. I think there are plenty of people in Israeli universities who embrace the same politics, who embrace the same exclusions, who embrace the same hostility to somebody who disagrees with them, who go out of their way to legitimize the same ways of thinking in global academia. No Israeli academic wants to be an Israeli academic. You want to be an academic. You want to be able to function in global academia. So the idea that an Israeli academic is living in a different world from everybody else, I also don't agree.
So, permit me to disagree with you now on this point. I lived until not very recently in Israeli academia, and I know this kind of discourse. It comes from many different quarters, but it's not. It's far from being accurate. After I published my book on post-Zionism, I was also ostracized here and there, but it's marginal. I remember once I was invited to talk in front of the sociological department in the Hebrew University, and I thought I had to carry with me, how you call it? Yeah, you know, I thought, yeah, that and I came there, and after first, you know, I found out that they all thought like myself, like me. Namely, roughly criticizing the government, very, instead of Zionism, I would say Israeli patriots, and no ostracism. Here and there it exists in few departments in one or another university. In Jerusalem, where I come from, it practically does not exist. There were a group of people that answer completely to your description. Most of them left the country. Most of them left the country because it's the best way to open doors of academia abroad. You want to be a professor at Exeter, you are Ilan Pape. But most of the people are not there. Most of my friends think roughly like me. Means we are very critical of the current government of Israel. We are very critical of the longest-standing, de facto, if not de jure, annexation of parts of the West Bank. We are very critical of what's going on in Gaza nowadays. We are not, you know, it's far from what you, I think, describe.
Sure.
Oh, I was just going to say...
Sorry, are you sure? You feel free. No. Sabrina,
So what I was trying to say is that it doesn't mean that any person who has to be anti-Semite must be a non-Jew. Some Jews are Jew haters. Yes, some Jews are Jew haters. Just like during the 12 days of the bombing in Iran, some Jewish rabbis, I think in London here, went to the Iranian embassy to do condolence For the Iranians, they killed. The IRGC, they killed. They went to sign condolence. Maybe you might see it in the news. They are against what Israel is doing. So those people, they are rabbis, not ordinary Israelis. They went to the Iranian embassy to sign a condolence register against their, they don't say it's their government. Again, because they say they don't believe in Israeli government, and they are Jews and they run synagogues. So those are anti-Semites. We cannot say because somebody is a Jew, he's not anti-Semite. We cannot say because somebody is a Jew, he's a non-Jewish hater. No. When we're talking about anti-Semitism here, it can be anybody. Some people are among us to destroy us. It must not be from outsider. When you believe that somebody who will destroy you must be from outsider, you are in face of Christ. When you want to cover both in and out, just like a bit taken into the Torah, when children of Israel were coming out from Egypt, they had a reverend. The very people who came out with them for freedom were plotting to topple the state. Under Moshe, they would get to the wilderness, they would advise them wrongly against what has been instructed, and they do a different thing, and they have a problem. And they institute the priesthood. They told Aaron, how can this be only that God is talking to? And eventually they had a catastrophe and a lot of people died. So those people inside, they are in the wilderness, were anti-Semites. They hated Israel. So what I'm trying to say is that it must not be that for you to be anti-Semite, there must be a goy or somewhere. No. Even in the very government, that's why after some times, the Israeli government will disband, because somebody is doing what the government doesn't want. So at that time, he's anti that government. Before the Iranian war, there was a army chief of staff also that the young had to say go before he could do some other wars. The details we don't know. There must be something that guy is doing that's anti-Israel or anti-Jew. So anti-Semitism, when we're looking for people outside to checkmate, we should look inside the house as well. There are ones inside the house, homegrown anti-Semites. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just answer briefly. Maybe Jews can be anti-Semite, I don't know, probably. One thing that I can say about it, this is to accuse Jews that are our rivals in many ways, us here, Israel, is a strategic blunder. It doesn't work because it turns around immediately into accusation of the accuser and victimization of the accused. This, again, if we take Judith Butler as an example, and I mentioned the article that she wrote against Summers, this is what she said. I am a victim, I am victimized, my freedom of speech is in danger, and so this is one point. The Jews can hate. Jews have a very special talent for hating. I think it's known. And Jews can hate other Jews, of course. There is a long tradition of something that is often called self-hatred or auto-anti-Semitism. I doubt if this advances much. But in the cases that I evoked here of intellectuals, like Judith Butler and many others, I don't think that anti-Semitism would be an adequate description of them. They have other things we can oppose.
So we don't have that much time, and the microphone's not working. So Sabrina, can I collect two quick, concise questions?
Yeah.
Speak loud.
Sure, so I guess my question is, I just graduated from undergrad, and I've seen a lot of these Jewish or Israeli professors who claim they're not anti-Semitic, but they're very critical of Zionism, I guess like the argument that you're making here, yet they organize events that lead to the harassment of Jewish students. So from your perspective, I'd like to understand why you think that that happens, even like there is anti-Semitism where their philosophy is growing. So I just want to understand.
Thank you. Concise question, please, and speak loud.
Okay, hi. My name is Ruth. I'm from Israel, and I'm a law professor. And I think that in Israel, as talked about with David earlier, it's harder to deal with anti-Semitism comparing to what's going on here or outside of Israel, especially in the legal academy, because you start discussing anti-Semitism, you try to define it, you're categorized as, right-wing, sort of Bibi. I'll do it very shortly. I was in Kaplan every week. I'm still in Kaplan. I think my government, I'm going to say here, racist and fascist, but still, I'm proud Zionist. But, and when I founded this Center for Learn Anti-Semitism, I did not get, blessed and support from my colleagues in the legal academy. So I think what happened here reflects it. So I think we have hard time as Israelis, deal with anti-Semitism. Like, it's easier in a way, which is twisted to Jewish in the diaspora to deal with anti-Semitism and be much more, decisive about it.
Important point. Excuse me. We're going to try to be egalitarian. Some people have a smoking professor. So please speak loud.
I was just going to say, not from a scholarly perspective, but from one that has experienced Jewish anti-Semitism. Post 10/7, 2 weeks later, after my husband and I and Israelis in Greenville, South Carolina, organized Israel Solidarity, our local rabbi called and said if we spoke any more about Israel advocacy or anti-Semitism, he would no longer work with my son for his bar mitzvah. That came from a Reform rabbi. And I think that it's really important that we actually get louder in our voice when we see anti-Semitism come from within the Jewish community, because we're not going to win if we don't.
Okay, look.
The collection. And you have 5 minutes.
I've met phenomena like the one you just described. And it's bad, it's disgusting. But is it anti-Semite? I mean, what I'm trying to propose is that we fine-tune our conceptualization of the phenomena, because when we bring together Jews, non-Jews, Arabs, Muslims, and pile them all under one title, it's counterproductive, and it's inexact intellectually. So I don't have the slightest intention to defend phenomena like the one that you propose. On the contrary, I agree this is something completely unacceptable, immoral, and stupid. Is it? But there are other things that are stupid, immoral, and unacceptable, which are not anti-Semitic. Not everything is anti-Semitism. This is in a very general terms, my point. Now about Israel again. I know what you're talking about because I gone through this experience. But I think it's on the surface. To some, maybe it's getting worse with time. And we know that there is in Israel what is called the Mechonat Haral, the poison machine. Especially now, it has effect. But I think that if you dig a little bit, it's not as bad. And then you ask me, what do I say about those? I know this, well, I haven't experienced it so much as you did, but I know what you are talking about, more or less. I was in the United States. I taught in the United States. I taught in other places, and I had some taste of this experience, of course. But first of all, I'll say it again. I don't think they all represent the same phenomenon. They are different in many ways. And I think that we have to distinguish here between what is anti-Semite in the strict sense and what are, other things.
Karen Milner. Karen, take a few minutes. Karen's a professor from South Africa and dealing with these issues in a hostile environment.
It's quite hard to keep this short because there's quite a... But I mean, as somebody, I wasn't at Durban, but I was in Durban, and so I'm very aware, for example, of the Durban 2001.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
She was in Durban.
So the Durban 2001.
I was in Durban in the 2000.
She's from South Africa. She wasn't at the conference, but she
I wasn't at the conference, but I'm very aware of the consequences, not only for Israel of Durban, but for diaspora communities around the world. And I suppose what I'm asking is that you differentiate, and I hear your emphasis on differentiating between anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, and anti-Semitism. But is there another way of thinking about it, which is that they are all forms of anti-Semitism? Because what I'm struggling to see here is what would be anti-Semitism. So if you are saying that Judith Butler is not anti-Semitic because they are don't have direct hatred of Jews, is that not just a different form of anti-Semitism? And what would be anti-Semitism in that context? If I can turn your argument around, I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I do try to specify each of the three terms you mentioned: anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, and anti-Semitism. But I do think I did say they all belong in different ways to one bad family, I would say. Of course. This was the whole point. The question I was asking myself, especially with the experience that I experienced with colleagues of mine in Israel and abroad, clerks, let's say intellectuals, academics, how to relate to their anti-Israelism. What is it? And oftentimes it is anti-Semitic, but I think that not always. And what I was trying to do is to give a kind of a phenomenology of anti-Semitism which permits to classify certain manifestation of hate of Israel or of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitic in a significant way that can help us understand the reality that we are facing. This is more or less, if I have to sum up.
So on this note, we're over time. Thank you for presenting here and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and spurring a conversation and a debate. So thank you very much for being here. So we have about 20 odd minutes. We should come back for the film, October 7th. Thank you. Sorry we couldn't get everybody.